What if I told you Clint Eastwood, yes, the Clint Eastwood made a film so uncomfortable, so creatively toxic, that he's completely erased it from his life? Not only does he never talk about it, he refuses to even watch it. Ever. And the real reason, it's not just about bad acting or a weak script. This goes way deeper. We're talking clashing egos, twisted behind-the-scenes drama, and a movie that made Eastwood question everything about his career. Most actors have at least one film they regret. A flop, a paycheck gig, a moment of weakness. But for Clint Eastwood, Two Mules for Sister Sara wasn't just a regret. It became a personal ghost. A haunting chapter that he's buried so deep you won't find him mentioning it in interviews, retrospectives, or even casual conversation. This isn't some random low-budget misfire either. It was a big studio western shot at the peak of Eastwood's rising fame, intended to push him from spaghetti western cult star to mainstream American icon, but instead it backfired in the most personal way possible. The kind of way that doesn't just make you cringe, it makes you angry at yourself for saying yes. And here's the kicker. On paper, this movie should have worked. It had a bankable leading man, a Hollywood icon as his co-star, a seasoned director, and a script packed with guns, grit, and a wild twist. But behind the scenes, it was a slow-motion train wreck that nearly derailed Eastwood's momentum, and it started with one woman. From the very first day on set, Clint Eastwood knew something was off. Not with the camera, not with the script, with his co-star. Shirley MacLaine was no amateur. She was bold, she was brilliant, and she had zero problem taking up space. But when that energy collided with Eastwood's no-nonsense, quietly intense persona, it was like watching gasoline meet fire. Eastwood was the kind of actor who let silence do the heavy lifting. A glance, a pause, a squint. That's all he needed. But MacLaine? She was a storm of opinions, instincts, and challenges. She questioned the director. She pushed the script. She refused to play the passive Shamsal Shiro, even in a Western. That should have been powerful, but instead, it became volatile. They didn't just disagree, they clashed. Day after day, scene after scene, what started as creative differences soon turned into personal tension. At one point, Eastwood reportedly left the set in frustration, calling the experience one of the most miserable of his career. That's a heavy statement coming from a man who worked with Sergio Leone in the blistering Spanish desert and didn't even flinch. MacLaine, for her part, never apologized for being who she was, outspoken, opinionated, and unafraid to push back. But for Eastwood, who valued control, simplicity, and emotional silence, working with her felt like performing surgery during a thunderstorm. And that chaos bled into the film itself. Every scene that was supposed to show tension between a rugged mercenary and a mysterious nun now carried a very real, very off-script bitterness. You weren't watching characters, you were watching two actors who could barely stand to share the frame. But this was just the beginning. Because what really shattered Eastwood's trust in this film wasn't just the on-set friction, it was the twist they saved for the end, one that would turn the entire plot into what he later called a joke. And trust me, what happened between Clint and Shirley on that set, that was just the beginning. What came next nearly broke him as an actor, and what the studio tried to pull off behind his back, you won't believe it. So if you want the full truth, uncensored, unfiltered, and buried for over 50 years, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around, because the story only gets darker from here. Clint Eastwood has always been known for loyalty. Once he finds someone he trusts, he sticks with them. And that's exactly why working with director Don Siegel on Two Mules for Sister Sara felt like a smart move at the time. Siegel wasn't just any director. He was the man who'd later help Clint shape some of his most legendary films, like Dirty Harry. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. On this project, their vision didn't align, not even close. What Eastwood thought would be a gritty, blood and dust Western turned out to be something else entirely. The tone veered into oddball territory, quirky, comedic, almost whimsical, and that's a word you never want to hear next to Clint Eastwood's name. He wasn't playing a gun-slinging badass in a desperate battle for justice. He was dragging a mysterious woman through the desert while bantering like it was a mismatched buddy comedy. It felt wrong, cheap, off-brand, and it wasn't just the script, it was how it was being shot. Don Siegel, for all his talents, pushed for moments that Clint found ridiculous, scenes that undercut the tension, dialogue that turned his hardened mercenary into a punchline. Eastwood didn't want laughs, i.e., he wanted edge, danger, silence with weight. but instead he was trapped in a film that felt like a parody of everything he'd built his image on. And the worst part? He couldn't say no, not yet. He wasn't the legend, he wasn't the director, he was still a rising star under studio control, forced to nod along as his instincts screamed, "This is all wrong." That helplessness, that betrayal by the very people he trusted, is what made this film unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. And we're not even at the part that truly made Eastwood regret ever signing on. Every good Western has a twist, a moral gray area, a character reveal, a betrayal. But the one they dropped at the end of Two Mules for Sister Sara, it didn't just ruin the film, it insulted it. All throughout the story, Eastwood's character believes he's protecting a nun, a woman of faith, pure and untouchable. The dynamic is tense. She's mysterious, he's skeptical. And through it all, the audience believes there's something deeper going on. Maybe trust, maybe redemption, maybe something human. But then the movie pulls the rug out. The big, shocking twist. She's not a nun at all, she's a prostitute, disguised in a habit. That's it. That's the twist they were so proud of. For Eastwood, it wasn't just cliché, it was cheap, lazy, a joke without a punchline. It stripped every emotional thread the movie tried to build and replaced it with a smirk, as if the whole film had just been a setup for a bad bar joke. A gunman and a prostitute walk into a war zone. Eastwood was furious. This wasn't what he signed up for. He had built his career on silent strength, subtle morality, and powerful, grounded storytelling. But now here he was, starring in a movie that felt more like a sitcom in cowboy boots. Worse still, that ridiculous twist made his entire performance feel pointless. All the internal conflict, all the protectiveness, all the grit, erased in one sentence, one eye-roll-worthy reveal. And when you pour yourself into a role, only to watch it unravel with a single line, it sticks with you. That's why Clint Eastwood never talks about Two Mules for Sister Sara. Not because it failed at the box office, not because the reviews were mixed, but because it betrayed everything he stood for as an actor, everything he wanted to become as a filmmaker. To this day, that twist lives in the back of his mind like a bad tattoo, permanent, embarrassing, and totally out of place. By the late 1960s, Clint Eastwood was already a rising star, the steely-eyed anti-hero from Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy. Fans saw him as unstoppable, unshakable, but what they didn't see was the truth behind the camera. Eastwood was still just a contract player, working within the rigid, suffocating grip of the old studio system. He didn't call the shots. Not really. He was a hired gun, cast in projects chosen by executives, given scripts that didn't align with his gut, and expected to smile through it all like a good soldier. Two Mules for Sister Sara wasn't a passion project. It was an assignment, and saying no wasn't an option, not without consequences. But here's the part that really stung. Clint already knew who he wanted to be. He could feel it boiling under the surface. He wasn't meant to be just another face on a poster. He had a director's mind, a storyteller's instinct. He wanted to make his kind of movies. Gritty, stripped down honest. Films with silence that screamed louder than any monologue. Stories with scars, not polish. But on the set of Sister Sara, he had no power, no say. He was being reshaped into something that didn't fit him. The jokes, the tone, the forced chemistry, it wasn't Clint. It was Hollywood's version of Clint, and it made him miserable. Imagine being on the verge of creative greatness, but stuck in a costume that doesn't fit, reciting lines you didn't believe in, alongside a co-star you could barely stand while pretending the whole thing was working. That's why this movie left a permanent mark. It symbolized a time when Eastwood was trapped, seen but not heard, famous but voiceless. And for a man who would later become one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood, that feeling of creative impotence was unforgivable. Two Mules for Sister Sara became the very thing he would spend the next 4 decades running from. A painful reminder of the artist he wasn't allowed to be. Since its release, Eastwood has said almost nothing about the film. No praise, no anecdotes, no director's commentaries, nothing. That's rare. For a man who revisits even his failures with brutal honesty, this one's just gone. Fans notice, historians speculate, but Eastwood's silence speaks louder than any quote. Something about that movie still unsettles him. Decades later, he won't even acknowledge it, but maybe he needed that failure. Maybe without Sister Sara, there'd be no Unforgiven, no $1 Million Baby, no Clint Eastwood the director, the auteur, the legend. Sometimes one bad film gives birth to a masterpiece, but it doesn't mean you ever want to see it again. So why won't Clint Eastwood watch Two Mules for Sister Sara? Because it's not just a bad memory, it's a scar, a relic from a time when he didn't have a voice, when the man we now see as untouchable was just another actor on a leash, and even legends don't like to remember when they felt powerless.